Well, hello. My name's Adam Archer from Archer Sharp Design. I'm going to do some quick introductions. So, who are we and what do we do? Well, like I said, I'm Adam, one of the co-owners and director of Archer Sharp Design. There's Nick here, who's the second part of the company, the sharp bit. Yeah, we've got Thomas Wilson, who's one of our technical production managers, and a guy called Joe Thomas, who's not with us today. Don't worry, he's not passed away. He's just working on a ship. So our company basically looks after quite a lot of lighting, predominantly on cruise ships, providing lighting design, lighting programming, now more lasers, video programming, etc., as well as the installation. And what we also support is the installation of some of the fixtures these days and looking after the refits. We started in 2019. Which was 5 years ago, and we're now a team of 4 with an office in Southampton. So we've come a long way, and that is basically a bit about us. What does the industry mean to us from a lighting perspective? Well, straight away we look after the main theatres on board the ships, but basically the bigger picture is the ship-wide venues, the open decks, the bars, the lounges, the restaurants, etc. So predominantly it is the theatres that we get involved with and we spec and sometimes have the privilege in designing. But like I say, the bigger picture is all the venues on board, especially when you look at new builds as well as refits. Some refits are done in dry dock, so they're done basically when the ship's out of water, there's no guests on board. And sometimes you get shoehorned with upgrades in service while there are guests on board, which have their own challenges. And as well as all that fun stuff, we also, because we're lovely people, we offer support remotely and also in-field support to the techs. Predominantly, it all happens on WhatsApp. It shouldn't do. But when the guys are stuck and they're in another time zone or in the far side of the world, they all just message us, and then we have to feed it right back to the correct channels. So sometimes that might be a case of getting them out of a sticky situation that a system's gone down, and we need to get it back up and running instantly. Some of our clients we can remote into the ships and help them direct, some you can't. So they all have different challenges along the way. So for those who don't know, what is a cruise ship? Well, basically the cruise ship as of 2022 in November had basically a net worth of about $30 million and had 302 ships out there. Now that was only 2 years ago, and as I read a post earlier this week, Royal Caribbean have just ordered 4 more of their biggest ship out there. So the industry is growing, so these facts are already wrong, but these are what I could get online, and tell you hand on heart what they were. They range in different sizes, of course. I remember my first ship in 2013 was a Thompson Dream, and she had 1,773 passengers, 863 crew. And now the average ship is 5,200 passengers. So that gives you an idea of the scale of what we're working with these days. And a lot of these places have, obviously, multiple bars, multiple restaurants, as well as many, many entertainment offerings and venues. And again, they range from theatres to rooms no bigger than this, with a lighting rig in there, or they've got an aqua theatre, or they've got a huge pool deck show. So we're going to try and go through a lot of these topics, but as you can understand, I can't go into every single one now because we'd be here for hours, and we all don't want that. But yeah, as I mentioned at the start, the biggest cruise ship out there at the minute, which was launched in January this year, is Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas. Now, there's a lot going on board. We've not personally had any involvement with this, but I just want to share with you an image of basically what it kind of looks like for those people who just think they're little boats bobbing around. Like I say, the ship I was on when I first started, I walked up the gangway and I thought, by Christ, this is big. And when you look at that next to the Royal Caribbean now, it would be the size of a lifeboat or two. So they're just growing and growing and growing. Typically, what is a theatre like on board? So basically, think of a West End theatre or a Broadway theatre and times it by 2, if not more. They've got all the gadgets and gizmos. They span multiple decks now. The older ships that are still around go from like 1 deck to 2 decks with their minimal fly towers. They've got some don't have fly towers. Some are just like this room, like I mentioned earlier, with a unistrut lighting grid in there. So wherever you go, whatever line you're on, whatever fleet you're on, they're all different, and they will remain different for years to come. The seating capacity, again, that changes. So the bigger ships obviously have bigger capacity, the smaller ships don't. Now, the smallest one we've been on has been in like a lounge, no much bigger than this, with curved two-seater sofas, up to like a whopping 2,000 passengers over multiple decks with balconies and boxes, royal boxes and things like that. Again, the stage sizes can vary. So when you're looking at lighting systems and what you can install in there, you've got to obviously take into consideration the space and what they can do. So again, it all varies. Some are small, some are big, you know. And modern ships now are doing things from proscenium, traditional proscenium theatres. Some have got thrusts in there, and a lot of the new ones, such as the Sun Princess, are now multi-space. So when you actually look at it and you're sitting there one night, you might be in the round. The changeover in the next day's end on, the seats can all move around like you'd expect in a multi-purpose venue on land. Some of the theatres have full height fly towers, depending on what brand you're on. Some of the older ships, depending on what brand you're on, have full height fly towers. But that space is basically money now. So that's revenue where they can have a fly tower and fly all this scenery, 32 fly sets, but also they could put X amount of cabins over multiple decks in that void. So depending on what the client is, if you're a cruise company that offers entertainment or an entertainment company that offers cruise, that varies, you know. And I personally don't think you're going to see many ships coming out now with fly towers. It's quite sad, and it's all going to video now. So lighting, you have to challenge video and all the video screens, which is great, but also not every show can be just video elements, because it's just too much in your face. You know, it's got to be used in the right application and things like that. The scale of the shows as well, when we're looking at the rigs and what we can do and what we can put in there, 9 times out of 10 we don't know what shows are happening 5 years out when we get engaged into a project. Some clients, they'll come to us, say, like 5 years, if not more, out and say, hey, we've got this ship coming, we want to design a system, can you help us? Yeah, no problem. Sometimes you get brought in 3 years out, sometimes you get brought in last minute. When I say last minute, it's normally about 2 years is the minimum. And at that point, you are left with whatever the outfit has designed in terms of the trusses, the lighting positions, the outlets, the patch, and things like that. So at that stage, we don't actually know what shows they're going to be putting on, if it's going can meet anything that you throw at it. Just a few examples of some of the ships we've had the pleasure of working on, plus I've thrown Icon of the Seas in right at the end there. So this is Icon of the Seas as theatre. This is actually an artistic rendering, I believe, that I found online. So you can see it's a huge, vast venue. This will be over 2 or 3 decks, plus then the balcony, which again will be higher, maybe 2 more decks by the time you've gone in and come down. You've got the Queen Elizabeth here, which is, again, it's over multiple decks where this picture's just been taken under the balcony. As you can see in this theatre, you've got multiple what they call royal boxes. So the scale of them, and of course at the end, the Queen Mary II herself, the last transatlantic liner out there, which is a thrust stage. So they're all very much different venues. They've got their own little hidden treasures. They've got their own little hidden niggles and naggles, you know, we have to get around. But that's part of our job when we're getting involved. So I've kind of broken this up into 2 little branches now where we're going. We're going to look at a new build situation and what typically is involved with that. And then we'll look at if we're just involved with getting into a company to actually design a show. So like I said, we're typically brought in between 5 and 3 years out to when the client first engages us. And the big things we have to do is try and establish what budget they've got and what they want to achieve in that venue, or venues on the ship if we're doing more. And sometimes at that point it's hard to say that if they've got an in-house company or they don't have an in-house company, they don't know what they're buying in yet because they might not have done those contracts. So you might be designing a rig that is for dance, you might be designing a rig that is for music, or even a theatrical show. So it is really, really hard to, first of all, put pen to paper and just say, hey, this is what you're going to have, or this is what we suggest. So we have to really understand, and that might be months of conversation backwards and forwards to on Zoom or meeting the client, coming up with ideas. Some of the budgets can vary from just tens of thousands upwards to like 2 million. dollars, depending on who you're with and what you're doing. Typically, they're under $1 million and around the £750,000 mark for a lighting rig that is for a ship theatre, given what it needs to achieve. So when you're also looking at the fixtures, you then have to look at basically what brands that client wants to use. Maybe there's relationships in the past with manufacturers, a certain type of light, and that might be just solely down to they've got a fleet of 15 other cruise ships, and they've got to maintain those as well as the new ones. So by the time they shoehorn something else in, is that really cost effective? Are they going to have the support? And sometimes as designers, we don't get a say on that. We get channeled in a way that we would like you to use this. And you can add more things and little tricks in your bag to add the sparkle as and where. But some people, like I say, would like you to use specific fixtures or a specific brand, whatever that may be for. But some other people just go, hey, what is the best fixture out there and can you make this work? But again, that is an open comment because you don't know what you're going to be doing at that point. The yard visits and the meetings with the client. So once you get engaged to do a show on a design the rig for the ship, there's multiple layers of challenges is probably the best word to say. You've got the client that wants the best for what they need. You've also got the yard that are contractually due to deliver what has been set out way before you've got involved. Plus then what you need to do as designers to achieve a product. And typically if you're not the first person the client's not the first in its class to design a ship. It's basically like buying a house, it's like a second-hand house. Once you've bought, the first person designs the house, they spec it all up to what they want, they buy the initial package, then client number 2 comes along and goes, hey, depending on the yard, that would come with the ship. And if you choose to use that, you do. It's up to the client. They might want to say, hey, use these, you draw them where you want. Or you can say, right, do you want to put your own rig in? Is it an owner supply rig? And if they say yes, you can then just take those fixtures out of the theatre, put them on the quayside within reason, design your rig, and then see where the rest of those lights then can be used on the ship, on the project, or around the rest of their fleet. And like I say, that's due to basically how it works when the client buys a ship. So that could be the theatre, it could be outside lighting, it could be promenade decks, it could be anywhere on the ship. So sometimes you get given a great pool of lights to play with, sometimes you don't. And either or can be a win, you know. Sometimes you think, hey, well, we've got those now, that's really cool, let's put them or save them for a show floor package to make a show look nice. Or we can just put those, we always wanted those, but we've never been able to afford them, but they're part of the deal. So we then have to go backwards and forwards with the shipyard and the client to decipher all this information. And that's normally known as the LES kit, which is the local entertainment systems equipment. And basically that's what comes, like I say, with the ship. So we go backwards and forwards and work out where we can get to. Before I move on to actually the install process, sometimes there's never the optimum lighting position that you want to put into a ship or hang a fixture. And sometimes you draw a position or you extend a position so it's longer and say, hey, guys, can we have this pipe longer or can we have this rated higher? And at the point that, like I said, we're engaged, things like that are hard to change. It sounds crazy because on land, you'd just go sort it out and you'd extend the pipe, you'd have someone to come in and rate it. But because the ship's technically not owned by the owner at that point, we can't do any of that. So we have to go to our client and say, we'd like to do this to achieve what you've asked us to do, and can now you push that up the line. And this isn't an overnight thing. It's not picking up a phone and making a call. It can take weeks and months, you know. And for us, it can get annoying because we would like to plough forward and get to the next stage, but until we get the answers from above, you can't. But there's so many layers of people involved, that makes it really hard. Then you've got the install process of when you finally design the rig and the client's happy and we can get onto the ship. Again, depending on the shipyard, depending on the client, there is a separate team that may be contractually there to hang the lighting rig. Maybe the client wants you to hang the lighting rig. Whatever that may be, we have to then achieve that. And if we're overseeing somebody else installing the rig, where it's our own team or the client's own team or it's the yard, until it's rigged and signed off by person X, we can't necessarily go in and start calling the shots and saying, hey, that's in the wrong place, that needs moving this way. Because again, people are contracted to do a certain job, and while ever it's not owned by the owner, we're constantly fighting. Once it's signed off and it's now out, well, now the clients, we can then move in and plough on and not do as we wish, because we still have to answer to questions and people, but we can make it fit for purpose and how it was originally drawn. As we know, the rigs are getting a lot bigger these days, and networking's getting vast. Some ships, believe it or not, are still run copper to the lighting bar, which is it's crazy. So if your brief is to make a rig that is fully versatile, it's pixel controlled, it meets everything of what is on the top table. Sometimes we have to install it, put everything in the dumb modes, like really basic modes, and then we'll go in and then we have to do new cable pulls once the ship's signed over to put network to the bars. And when I say we have to wait to the end, again, we can't start adding things as the owner or the client. We're working for the client, so we can't start adding things until the ship is signed off, because as soon as we go along, open a penetration up, pull new cables, if something of their current install doesn't work, we will be the blame, or the owner will be to blame, and that'll be a line item off the bill. So there's a lot of hoops to jump through every step of the way, but it's fun. I will say it is fun. It's just challenging. And then before we pass it on to whoever's actually designing the shows, there's another layer that come in, another team of people, which is called the commissioning team. And that, again, it typically is another outside company, an outside person, and they will come in to check that our contract has been met, that we've designed the rig, that we've said we've delivered that, and also that the infrastructure that the shipyard have installed has been met. So with that said, we basically have to wait around and make sure that they test every functionality of every fixture, make sure every patch bay works, everything works. And at that point, that's when it will get the overall sign-off and the client will be happy, which moves me on to the handover to the client. And at that, like I say, at that point, that is when we can start having conversations with the design team and the programmers and the patch and things like that. So that is part one. So a very quick overview, don't get me wrong, of how you would design a lighting rig for a new ship. One of the biggest challenges is, like I say, it's the fixtures and the budgets, because when you start looking at these 5 years out, when you get to actually buying the fixtures, the rate the moving lights are coming out and the equipment, it's out of date. Whatever you spec'd 5 years ago is out of date. So what we find works for us is we will go to whatever company we've been asked to use, or whatever company we would like to use, depending on the client, and we will go, what are your two most expensive spot and wash fixtures? And if it's X amount and X amount, we will just say, right, we'll have 48 of those, 58 of those. And basically all we're doing at that point, it's clear as mud, like we're putting a placeholder money in place. So if the client's happy with X amount of money, they sign that off. Then fast forward to 2 years out, we will then go back, review that pot of money and say, hey, right, this is what we agreed. Let's now go see what is available and what's new. And then we come to shows like this, wander around, make notes, go, hey, that's a cool thing. Let's start chatting deals. What we don't do, we'll try and get ballpark figures, but at the end of the day, we don't do the overall buy-in. So we have to pass that on to the client and say, we've got these fixtures in mind. It's either going to be come in less than what we said originally, or it might go over what we said, and then there's negotiations from there. So at that point, again, you still might not know what shows are happening. You might not know if it's a theatre show or a rave. I mean, you look at some of the ships that are like Virgin out there now. It is literally just music, you know. You look at some other cruise ships that are out there, and it's West End Broadway shows. You look at some others, and it's theatrical, and that's all they want with scenic. So choosing fixtures is always going to be a hard one. And I guess pleasing everyone. There's no pleasing in everyone. You could give them the best rig ever, but somebody will say, hey, why is that not in that position? Or why is that in that mode? Or why is that not here? Or can I have 5 more of those? Normally that's what I say, can I have 5 more of those? But hey. Moving on to the design side of it then. So we do both. So we do the new ship stuff, and we also we can do the delivering of the actual show design for quite a lot of our projects. But some projects you're involved with have external creatives and external design teams, and this is where then the bigger conversations start happening. Now, depending on how forward the company is with engaging in what they would like to design and what offerings they want to do, those designers might be involved with you from year 4, from year 3. Some come in very last minute. And then you've just got to work with them and say, right, what would you like to achieve? Obviously, your hands are tied because you've now bought the rig. The rig's been installed. But in everything that we do, you have to have movement, and you have to have a few spare fixtures and a few spare of this to make their wishes come true at the end of the day. Because, like I say, you'll never design the exact rig for everyone. So with that in mind, you then open the conversation up to the show lighting designer and try and go backwards and forwards. And again, it can take a couple of weeks, because while you might agree with them, you've then got to pass it up the chain to the client to make sure they're happy. Because if they want another moving light putting in stage left to do one shot, what is that going to be to everybody else? So you need to put 2 in, so it's symmetrical for the next show. Because a lot of these shows as well are around for about 5 years, and then they go. Some last longer, some last less. So while you might get a theatrical show coming in and you meet all their criteria, they go in 5 years' time, another show comes in, and they want to change it all again. Now, obviously, you can't, because you've designed the rig to last for all the shows that are there, and there could be there could be multiple different shows, multiple layers to everything. So there's a lot of conversation to be had, and again, it's just getting their expectations and making sure their requirements are met where possible. A lot of the things, if we say if it's a show-specific fixture and they're adamant of having X, Y, or Z, we will try and push that back onto the production company to say, can you buy this for your production, and it will only be used for your production. And then that gets put in the rig to meet their needs and goes down. Gone are the days of repping lighting rigs. Again, when I first started in 2013, there was a few moving lights on the ships, but we did have generics, and there was a gel call for every show, there was a focus for every show, there was a gobo load for every show, in the generics that is. So we don't do that anymore. Everything is a moving light fixture. And primarily just because there's no time anymore. These entertainment venues are rammed with different entertainment offerings. It could be a movie, it could be a game show, or it could be a theatre show. So, or even sometimes you get like the big tours getting dispatched in the theatres on 8 o'clock in the morning when you want to do maintenance. So you do what you can and try and minimise. Everything is normally a moving light to every extent, really. The other big thing we do is the show file and the housekeeping, really. With the client basically has multiple ships, and they have multiple shows. They've got multiple texts going between all the different ships. So we try to standardise the actual programming of when we're lighting shows, and that's really hard when you get other programmers coming in saying you want to program it like this, this, and this. You don't give them a Bible of how you want it doing, because that would be insulting, but you give them key points that when you walk away, it needs to look like this. So anybody, mainly the techs coming in, the onboard techs, don't feel scared. They can open up a show file and off they go and see what's happening. And then carrying on with the shows and how they come together, there's your usual typical flow, really. It's the same as a land-based show. You've got your creative team meetings on board. There are always follow-up meetings. But again, we've now got the cruise layer into that, which is, while they have their discussions of what they want to achieve, they can't necessarily just put pen to paper and go, that's good, because it has to go back to the cruise client. Sometimes even when a ship's being launched, that client then might come back to you and go, hey, is there capacity in the system to do this? What would the impacts be if we change this for this? Which has happened, and you might change a system of lights out a year into service and then have to go back and re-update the shows just to meet somebody's requirements. If contractually they've got a designer that needs X, Y, and Z and we can't deliver that at the time, then we have to go back and review that. With the ships as well, we're always using new technology and stressing that to the max. So there's a lot of R&D involved. So when I say we're pushing things to the new, for example, use drones on a show. Nobody's used really drones at sea. You normally have drones with GPS on a ship, moving ship. You've got Wi-Fi anchors everywhere. That has its own problems because obviously the ship's pitching and it's rolling. So you're always pushing everything to its new end really, and making sure that you can achieve what you're saying for these new projects. So that might mean that we have to go on to older ships to test things and so on. And then there's the usual what happens as you'd expect on land. So you do your shop and site visits. You get the design team coming out to the ship. But one of the hardest things when looking at lighting positions and like what installation stuff you can do, the shipyard they can build everything within a tolerance, and don't quote me on this, but it's about 100 to 150 mil. So if you're asking for like lighting ladders that can be 2 fixtures abreast, actually their tolerance is 150 mil. So when you get to site and hang your lights and you find, well, I can't hang these now, we've promised all these people these fixtures, then that is another layer of challenge you have to overcome, how we get around that and how we fix that. So there's a lot of site visits, and at the time when you do the site visit, obviously the ship's not owned by the client, or if it's an existing ship, there's all sorts of going on. There's the theatre space might be set up for another show. It might not be a clear stage for you to go on and do all your measuring, things like that. So yeah, there's the ship visits that we have to do. There's the on-site install and fit out for any new shows that happen. Typically on a new build, that will happen in the shipyard. It gets to a point where they kind of semi-sign the theatre off and you can start fitting out things at your leisure within reason. But if you're fitting out pieces of scenery on a ship that's in service, we've got the challenges of when can we get in, how can we get in, what are we going to affect if we do this now, because obviously they've still got an operation to run at the end of the day. And then the production process on board. When you're trying to do our job, we want as little people in the room as possible, because we want an empty stage with a tech time and lighting time. A ship, you can't do that. Now the reasons why is, like I said, there's always something going on in the space, and until normally about midnight is when everyone clears out, and then the new team can go in and start to work. Now, obviously, everyone's fighting from that window from midnight till 6, 7 a.m. when you get booted out again. But also with that, you've got every other department going in. Your set electricians, your scenic carpenters, your audio teams, your video teams. So everyone's working on top of each other. So finding time to actually do your job is quite challenging sometimes. And then the biggest one is when we eventually all walk off the ship from a creative point of view, whether it be a new build or it's a ship in current service, it's handing everything over to the ship's techs. And a lot of them are our friends. However, they're not obviously all trained on the new systems, whether you put a brand new lighting fixture in there, an IP fixture, or you put a tracking system in there, or you put drones in it. Whatever you do, it's the first time these guys have seen it, and they've not had chance to go on land and learn the new fixtures, the new systems they're working with. So sometimes you need to make sure you allow enough time to go over everything in as much detail as you can, and that sometimes becomes challenging because while that person might get it, their contract's 4 to 6 months. They then will walk down the gangway on their last contract day, pass the keys to somebody else. They'll walk up the gangway and they've inherited this new baby. And sometimes that's when we get the calls in to help them out, and we have to do site visits and ship visits to help facilitate the new systems. So basically, it's kind of the same process as you would expect on land with a new show, apart from it's just got its own little challenges in there, such as the working hours you can work in the theatre, because it's a theatre that's running constant. Obviously, you've not got dedicated personnel on the show to run its lifetime. You've got different people every 4 to 6 months, and some of the designers are external creatives that might never have worked on a cruise ship before. So them trying to understand what they're doing anyway with the show, as well as how a cruise ship works, can sometimes be a little challenging. Which moves me nicely on to what are the challenges? Well, there are lots. They're not limited to this list, but these are some of the big ones. Power is one of the biggest ones. There's typically 2 voltages on the ship, 110 and 220. I'm not going to go into that too much because I might get caught out. So I only know a little bit about the power. But in the old days, we used to have discharge rigs. And, for example, if it was a big moving light rig consisting of 96 moving lights, Vari lights, for example, we had to ring the engine control room to say when we were going to strike the rig because of the power spike. So you'd stagger it anyway, but you'd always have to ring the ECR, which is the engine control room, to say, hey, we're just going to strike the rig and we're going to be running it from now till 11:30. Let them know when you've finished. Now, you'd never get that on land. You'd just plug it in, press strike, and off we go. But now we've gone to LED. We don't have to do any of that. So LEDs are obviously a lot better for us. I don't think there's a lot of projects we look after now that are any tungsten or discharge, really. And the upkeep of the fixtures is massively improved, you know. Some of the new LED fixtures, there's a lot going on. As I go on in a moment to with working on a floating space, one of the biggest problems we do have is vibration. Now, obviously these ships are on a moving ship that's pitching and rolling all the time, and normally they're at the front of the ship. Directly below them, there's 3 or 4 big bow thrusters, which are big engines that push the ship on and off the quayside. Now, when they go on, everything in that theatre vibrates. Now, that's not going to do any good to any fixture. So we have to make sure that the fixtures that we're getting, obviously, can be robust enough to that as well. There are things, the sea state and the swells, sometimes you can't bring trusses in at sea. So if there is a bar, if you've got front of house trusses that are on chains or on steel wire, if there's a problem when you're on a transatlantic crossing, for example, you can't just bring that truss in because of the movement of the ship, and it'll be out of its guides. And to get it back into its guides is quite a challenge. So you can only move trusses that are on a scissor frame, and that is basically just to try and alleviate any other issues that you might have if you try to bring it in during a show. Obviously, if there's a fire, that's different. You do whatever you need to do to make that happen. The other, like I mentioned on the previous slide, the time within the venue is another crucial one. You normally get from about midnight till about 6 or 7 a.m. Especially if you're working on the open decks as well. If you're doing deck shows or within venues that have got a glass roof, you're fighting the sun. That's a given. So those times are always about the same. It's normally midnight till about 6 a.m. for all departments to work. When you're on a crossing from, say, Southampton to New York and it's 7 days, the strict controlled environments to working at height. So as well as ringing the engine control room to strike the rig in the first place, if it is a discharge rig, you've then got to ring the bridge to ask to climb a ladder. So there are all these different challenges that come into place, going up genie lifts, performer flying. They all need to have the approval from the master on the bridge or the officer of the watch. And like I say, that's not everything. We're looking now at the infrastructure on older vessels, which is a big one. When you do refits, the ship would, when it first comes out, it won't have a refit until about year 5, and then after that they get more regular depending on the needs. But some of the older ships now, where we're trying to update them and bring in a new lease of blood with new fixtures that are channel hungry, let's say. We've not got network to bars, it's all copper. We have to then open fire zones and penetrations, which we don't do. There's a specialist maritime team that come on to do all the cable pulling. We add in new lighting positions where we can, and again, that has to be a whole separate welding team and so on. And what we would expect and we take for granted on land is, hey, we'll just ring up a company that's down the road to do this. On a ship, you can't do that. You could be in the Caribbean, you could be in Southampton. So wherever you are, there are a lot of challenges to get things done, which again brings me on to the ship's production team. They are actually only around as well for 10. Well, they need 10 hours of rest in every 24 hours, and that is governed by maritime law. So if we need some spares, if we need spare lamps, if we need where's the spare fixtures or spare pathport nodes or Luminex nodes, and they're in bed, we can't just ring them up. Even if it's crucial, we need it there, and then we can't. So there are strict rules on the production teams, which can become a challenge. Some ships and some companies, when you're doing new shows, they will overstaff, so you've got support 24/7 as you need it. But the big one that we also need to remember is that a lot of the teams, it's an international team, so a lot of them are not English speaking, so sometimes you have to go through a process with them that it might take longer for them to understand, or you have to explain more thoroughly what you need. You can't just pick up the phone and say, hey, I need this, because they need to go speak to somebody else who then never seen this apparatus before or piece of equipment. So it's lovely because you see them develop and they grow with you. And like I mentioned earlier, the handover between crew members when they're going up and down the gangway at the end of the contracts is a big one, because while I said you could teach them a new system, whether it be a tracking system, they will say they'll write everything down, and they will, but whether that gets handed over, read, interpreted, or a step got missed, that sometimes is a huge, huge challenge. So when we're doing all of this design and thinking of all of these lovely things we can shove into these venues, you've always got to just think, if we didn't know how to operate it or know what we're doing, how would we get around that? And finally, the biggest challenge is international logistics. So if some of the ships live the other side of the world, if you've got fixtures on board, are the spare parts? Are the people trained in fixing them? Can they open them? Have they got the right pressure test kits to open them up and reseal them? It's all these things. It's consumables. It's in-person support and remote access where we can provide and help. We do our best where we can, but sometimes wherever the ship is, the time zone, not everybody can help. So we've spoke about the touched on the new ship side. We've touched on the creative side for the shows. Some of the challenges. I know I've spoke a lot about the theatre, but I will just quickly touch on and do a quick hat tip to outside decks. Different clients have different regulations for outdoor fixtures, some of which need to be IP67, some need to be IP66, some need to be IP65. That is nothing that we as designers specify. That is something that is written into a contract, and we have to adhere to that. That is to do with salt ingress to the fixtures. You will go up to the pool deck at night and you'll see a guy with a pressure washer not too far than this from that light away, and they will be jet hosing salt water into a fixture. And the amount of times you'll tell them to stop, they will carry on. So we have to look at the paint and what is for like corrosion and things like that. So that is a big one for us when speccing outdoor lights, and just making sure they can withhold to it, and the support with the manufacturers there for the client when we leave. I'm going to start to wrap up now, but I just thought for those who haven't seen a cruise ship before, this is some of our work and some of our shows that we've had the pleasure in designing on the ships to give you an idea of the scale. Some have got a video wall with musicians, and there's some scenic elements in there. You've got some shows that some ships that don't have video walls, and it's traditional scenic. You've got some that are huge, like vast spaces from the floor to the ceiling, but there's nothing above that. There's nothing there. So it's all cabins. And then you've got some theatres that are the more newer ships that don't have fly towers. So what you see there, 4 meters to the grid, that's it. But it's all made up by video, and what you can't see in that photo is there's video screens in the house. Some have got multiple bits of automation, so lifts that come positive. There's a fly piece coming in there. And some ships, which, like I say, are no bigger than this room. So there's a vast there of what the ships can do and what they look like. And I will now try and answer any questions that any of you've got that have come up in this. If you have any, feel free to shout away. That's an even smaller ship, by the way. That's probably the roof's about here on there. So they do vary in size. They've got performer flying and things like that. So, any questions? Nobody shout from the back. I was hoping there's going to be more people here, but yeah. I mean, if you do feel like you've got any questions, we will be around the show for the next couple of days. Feel free to tag us on or follow us on social media. And I guess if there's no questions, all it leaves me to say is thank you. And, where's he gone? Oh, it's coming. We'll see you at the pub. If not, on a cruise. If not, on a beach. Thank you.